So Dune Awakening is an upcoming survival MMO, but I've still been seeing a lot of confusion around how this game is going to be an MMO and if it's actually going to be of the scale of an MMO. A lot of people still think that it's just going to be Conan Exiles with a Dune skin on top. And while there are going to be a lot of similarities to Conan Exiles because it's in the same subgenre of survival games, Dune Awakening is going to have a lot of MMO elements within it. Now, with saying that, Dune Awakening is still going to primarily be a survival game. It is still going to have all of those same survival elements. It's going to have a lot of the same gameplay loops, just there's going to be a handful of systems added in that includes a lot of social features, and then there will be a lot more players able to, say, do combat with each other at the same time. And this confusion has actually caused the developers of Dune Awakening and the people at Funcom to actually stop calling the game an MMO, because when they say it's going to be an MMO, a lot of people instantly start to think it's going to be something like World of Warcraft, or it's going to be something like Final Fantasy XIV or Guild Wars 2. And while it's going to share some of the same elements, its foundation is still a survival game. And even though they've stopped calling it an MMO in a lot of the advertisements, they have also said that there has been no actual change to the game. So how many players they want to be able to fight against each other is still going to be the same. All of the elements and systems of the game are still going to be the same. So I want to go over how Dune Awakening is actually going to be an MMO. And I think the easiest place to start is the overall server architecture of the game and how all of that's going to work, because this will give you a good idea of how many people you can come across or fight against in whatever different piece of content you're doing in the game, because the different maps of Dune Awakening all kind of have a bit of different rules to them. Now, starting off with a top-down view, you are going to be choosing a world in Dune Awakening. Think of this as choosing a realm in something like World of Warcraft. You choose your overarching realm, and anybody else who chose to play on that world, you'll be able to come across in some piece of content on certain maps in the game. So if you choose to be on, let's say, World 1, they'll probably be named something different, but you're on World 1, you won't be coming across people in World 2. That is a different realm or a different overarching server. You won't be able to come across people in the different worlds, and presumably you would have to make a different character if you want to go play in a different world. So as we're going through all these different rules, all these different zones and maps, keep that in mind. You chose World 1, everybody on World 1 are all on the same world with you. Nobody else from other worlds will be on that world. Now, once you've customized your character and got into the game, you're going to start in like a 10 to 15-minute starting scenario where it's just going to teach you a bit about the game, start you in this cave. You'll get like your starting equipment and your suit, and once you've exited out of that small scenario, you will be put into the first map of the game, Hagga Basin. Hagga Basin is going to be quite a bit unique compared to a lot of the other maps you can go to, and you will be starting in what's kind of like a starter portion of Hagga Basin. As you progress more, you'll get into the rest of Hagga Basin and be able to just freely travel everywhere. And Hagga Basin is the size of Conan Exiles itself. I think it may even be slightly larger, but the developers have said there's like around 100 hours of content within Hagga Basin, and that doesn't include gathering a bunch of other resources, making other bases, farming, because survival games are kind of very known for having a lot of built-in playtime, just kind of re-farming the same stuff, kind of build up your bases more, build up how many resources you have, and maybe get higher tier of items. And one of the big ways Hagga Basin is going to be unique is Hagga Basin is going to have around 40 to 50 players on each different version of Hagga Basin. There are going to be a ton of different versions of Hagga Basin on your same world. So Hagga Basin itself is going to play more like Conan Exiles or like server-based survival games. 40 to 50 players, if you want to play on that Hagga Basin, and there's say already 50 players, so it's already capped out, you may have to wait for a queue or someone else to leave to be able to get into the Hagga Basin. But there's going to be a bunch of different ones you could choose between, and you'll probably want to choose a main one that you stay on, because one of the reasons Hagga Basin is not going to have hundreds of players is because this is where you're going to be building permanent bases. In the Hagga Basin, and with it being primarily PvE focused, if you build a base and have a shield generator on it, pretty much nothing can destroy your base. If you don't have a shield generator, sandstorms could come through and damage your base, and I think other players will in some way be able to attack you if you don't have that shield generator. But if you keep a shield generator up, and it seems like you'll be able to put enough resources in your generator moderators to keep it up for like 20 days, and then you can just refill it anytime you want. If you keep that up, that's pretty much just a permanent base. And that's why they won't be able to have hundreds of concurrent players in one version of Hagga Basin, because you don't want thousands of bases no matter how big the map is. It'll just start to lag the server. That's why there's all these different versions of Hagga Basin. You'll also be able to see what Hagga Basin your friends are on, if all of you want to play in the same one or have your whole guild on the same one. And you're going to be spending a good amount of time in Hagga Basin. You're going to be staying there until you can build yourself an ornithopter, and after you build an ornithopter, you'll be able to go to the world map, which is this top-down view map where you're primarily just flying an ornithopter, and that will allow you to go to any of the other maps of the game. So keep that in mind. Hagga Basin going to be a massive map. It's going to have less players, so it'll feel a bit more like normal survival games. But once you get that ornithopter, you'll be able to fly to the other maps that'll feel much more like an MMO and start introducing a lot more of the MMO elements. And the first bit of this are the two social hubs that'll be there on launch, which are two different cities for the different factions, Arakeen and Harko Village. And now these aren't going to be combat focused areas. These are social hubs. The developers have mentioned that they want a good amount of players in these social hubs, so let's say 100 people. And then once it gets to that cap, another instance of that social hub will start up, because you're not going to be building here or doing any combat, so they can just open as many instances as they need, but it'll feel much more like an MMO because there'll be so many players there. There'll be quest givers. There'll be the player auction house or market, which is going to be really big for having that player economy, making it feel much more like an MMO. And you'll be able to fly here pretty much anytime you want. Something else is a bit unique is you will be able to find NPCs on Hagga Basin that will take payment to fly you to the social hubs before you have your ornithopter. So if you want to go pick up objectives, or if you want to go to the player market, you can do that before you actually get your own ornithopter. So there's going to be a big area in which it starts to open up much more and starts to feel a bit more like an MMO. And then past the social hubs, you have where the game is really going to start to feel like an MMO, the Deep Desert. Now, the Deep Desert is where a lot of the content of the game is going to exist. The Deep Desert is basically 9 different zones meshed together with much higher player caps. So specifically, hundreds of players in each one of these 9 different areas. Now, you'll freely be able to travel between these 9 different areas, but for server performance, each one of those different zones is hosted on its own server. There's no instancing or anything like that, but if a section gets capped of players, you just won't be able to enter that area until someone else leaves. And these 9 different areas of the Deep Desert is going to be like 9 times the size of Conan Exile's map. So it's kind of like 9 Hagga Basins. There's going to be a different play space, but it's going to be absurdly massive. PvP is going to be active everywhere except this smaller strip that once you enter Deep Desert, it's kind of like a PvE area, so you can't get attacked instantly when entering there. This is really where it's going to start to feel like an MMO, because in one of these zones, you could have hundreds of players fighting each other in a battle at one time. Now, I'm sure if there's going to be like 300 people fighting in a singular battle, it'll still probably be laggy. There's probably only a couple MMOs ever to be released that could do that effectively, but you're still able to do that. And I think some of that lag is what a lot of people expect in really large scale MMOs. Now, a pretty big difference between Hagga Basin and the Deep Desert is obviously the player count. But one of the reasons they're able to get that player count is because the Deep Desert is a very unique mechanic in that it wipes on a weekly basis. A Coriolis storm comes through and wipes away the map, wipes away all player structures, and actually changes up the map. So one dungeon that was available one week may not be available the next week. It also changes up where all the resources are. So it's kind of like a Rust weekly wipe in one area, but you still have Hagga Basin and the other areas to have your permanent bases where you store all of your best resources. And then anytime you want to go to the Deep Desert, you and everybody you're playing with kind of choose what things you want to take into the Deep Desert. And you can still build in the Deep Desert. So for that week, you could build a massive base to try to defend a really lucrative area, which again, going to be really good for that MMO aspect, having all these massive guilds try to fight each other in the full PvP areas. And this weekly reset of the Deep Desert is actually going to bring in a lot of additional MMO aspects as well through multiple other systems. Like for instance, with a lot of the dungeons and points of interest being changed or no longer accessible for certain points, that means that if you went into one of those points of interest or dungeons and maybe farmed up a unique schematic that could come from there, you as a player can now be one of the only people on your overarching world to have that schematic for the next week or a handful handful of weeks until that dungeon is again accessible. So you could really corner the market on your world of that specific unique item that you could craft a bunch of and potentially make a ton of spice. And being able to do things like that are some of the first things I think of with an MMO. You're also going to have the cartography skill where you can make maps of areas that show all of the resource points and all of the points of interest in dungeons. And because the Deep Desert is wiped weekly, that means every new week, all of the cartographers are going to want to map the Deep Desert. And remember, it's absurdly large, so this will take a lot of time. So being somebody that, say, goes and creates really good maps of the Deep Desert quicker than anybody else every new week will allow you to just be the most well-known map maker on your overarching world and be able to sell those to other players because they know you make the best maps. And on top of all of this, there's also going to be a really large system called the Lancerad. It ties into all of the other elements of the game because there's going to be the two different factions on launch you can join, either the Harkonnen or the Atreides, and every week there'll be a Lancerad where it's basically like a bingo board of objectives, and when one faction gets that bingo board, the other one can't get it. So you want to basically get bingo first for that week, and then you're able to choose a buff or a server rule for the next week. So maybe you could choose full loot PvP for the next week in the Deep Desert, or you could give your faction a reduction in crafting costs for that week. So this is going to be a very important objective that's across the entirety of the world you're playing on that a majority of the players are going to want to take part in some way. And that faction versus faction competition is again going to be another MMO-centric system. So all of these different elements combined is just going to make Dune Awakening an MMO survival game. I know a lot of people have still been trying to say that this is just going to be Conan Exiles with a Dune paint job on top, but there are a lot of additional elements, even just outside of being able to have hundreds of people fight each other at the same time. There's just going to be a ton of other systems that are much more MMO centric, that are very socially focused features. Even just having this one overarching world, thousands and thousands of people on it, and choosing to play on that one server with all these different guilds you could join and have this guild v guild or faction v faction combat, all of those things play into an MMO. All of those things play into this iteration of Funcom's survival development, because there still will be a lot of the base survival elements from Conan Exiles. This is still a survival game in the subgenre of survival games that was pretty much started with Ark Survival Evolved. Then Conan Exiles helped to evolve that even more, especially with things like the Thrall system. And now going into Dune Awakening, we're going to see a kind of mesh of a lot of the games Funcom has developed in their past. If you don't know, Funcom was primarily an MMO developer for a long time. They have a long list of pretty unique full-scale MMOs that they have developed, and then they made Conan Exiles, which is one of their most popular games. Now they're just kind of merging the two into Dune Awakening, and I am personally liking a lot of the things I've been seeing for this merging of survival and MMO aspects. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.